Former First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama, once gave a very insightful comment on the issues of prejudice and division in America. Here's what she said in an interview with Stephen Colbert.
We got to travel around this country and meet people on the ground. What we learned is that in this country, there are decent people of all persuasions. The problem is we don't know each other. We don't let each other in. And I said in this book, it is hard to hate up close. It is easier to hate when you're hating a person through a filter.
Not only did she realize for herself that the walls we put up are quite flimsy when you're standing right next to the person you're meant to be different to, but her sentiments are echoed by research. It does seem hard to hate when up close. In this final lesson of the unit, we're going to look at evidence-based ways to reduce prejudice, especially when it comes to people of different cultural backgrounds. We've previously explored how and why stereotypes form, which can lead to prejudice and discrimination. Not surprisingly, these stereotypes are likely to persist and strengthen if they're never challenged. Studies in this area led Gordon Allport to develop what he called the contact hypothesis, which simply says that increasing the interaction between groups that are in conflict can reduce prejudice. Another way of saying this is intergroup contact. Individuals within groups must engage with people from other groups because that's where misconceptions can be addressed and the fear of unfamiliar cultures can be reduced. But there are two other factors that make the contact effective. The first is if there is equality when the groups mix. The social interactions need to occur where there is no power difference and no opportunity for one to exert dominance over the other. This was supported by research by Grack and Rickman. Interactions between mixed races were more likely to increase mutual understanding and decrease prejudice if the people were on the same level. For example, student to student or colleague to colleague, rather than principal to student or manager and colleague. This can be difficult in societies where the majority group may naturally have much more power than the minority groups, but it's essential that we still try. The second factor that makes the contact effective is if it's sustained. When trying to combat stereotypes, long-term contact works much better than shorter bursts, and you can imagine why. It gives individuals more opportunities to find out more about each other. Of course, the question becomes, how do you get different groups to spend a long amount of time together? Here's a study that might give you a clue. In 1961, Sheriff and colleagues conducted a study on 11 to 12-year-old boys attending a summer camp in the Robbers Cave Park in Oklahoma, United States. It would later be called a real-life Lord of the Flies and was very ethically questionable, but it did provide insights into group social behavior. They randomly divided the boys into two groups and held a series of contests designed to create rivalry. As expected, over a few days, what began as good sportsmanship developed into quite ugly behavior, with the groups, who named themselves the Eagles and the Rattlers, forming very negative stereotypes about each other. There were food fights, theft, and constant accusations. When the Eagles won the final of the contest, the Rattlers raided their cabin and stole their prizes. A fist fight developed, and the staff finally had to intervene to prevent injury. But then, the researchers told the boys that there might be a water shortage due to a damaged water tank. And guess what happened? The groups discussed the problem together and came up with a solution. The researchers provided another collaborative task: help rescue a truck that had been bogged. The incentive was carrying the next week's supply of food. All the boys worked together to get it out of the mud, and rivalry between the groups greatly diminished. Later, the Rattlers would even use money they won in a contest to buy treats for the boys in both groups. The Robbers Cave experiment demonstrated that prejudice and hostility could be overcome by providing the groups with a goal that neither could achieve on their own. We call this a superordinate goal. What this accomplishes is that it forces the different groups to see themselves as one, and they end up spending a lot of time together as they work to achieve the goal. Of course, both groups must see the value in accomplishing this superordinate goal, and therefore why they must cooperate. Another thing the Robbers Cave study highlighted was the power of allowing people or groups from different backgrounds to be mutually interdependent. Pushing the truck out of the mud could not be achieved by a single group, so the boys all knew they needed each other. Note that none of these techniques are a magic bullet. It's a combination of sustained equal contact by providing a superordinate goal that requires mutual independence that gives the group the best chance of seeing eye to eye and finding out for themselves that a lot of their stereotypes may be wrong. And you know that I'm not going to end without bringing this back home. There is 100% a culture or a group of people who are very different to you, probably ones that you find very hard to get along with. What might it look like for you to have more contact with them? What do you believe is worth fighting for that can only be achieved if you both work together? We've seen the potential for groups of humans to carry out what can only be described as great evil, but also very great good. How can you move towards your enemy, so to speak, so that you can find out for yourself how hard it is to hate up close? As I always say, this won't be easy, but it's definitely worth fighting for. Thank you so much for watching these psychology video lessons, and I hope they've enlightened both your mind and your heart. Mr Ting out.